So, what is the method of identifying risk throughout the project? And basically, identifying risk is a process to understand what are the potential might hurt the particular project. There are different tools and techniques that use to identify risks. Brainstorming or Delphi technique or interviewing or SWOT analysis will examine each one by itself and how it is being done. Brainstorming, probably you guys, most of you hear this term, is a technique by which a group attempt to generate idea to find a solution for certain uh, situation, and it usually happened in a smaller group, and smaller group has a facilitator who can basically lead this group and organize it. And as a facilitator, you should be very careful um, misusing brainstorming, because it's somehow it is kind of psychology. You don't want to abuse uh, how it is individual produce the idea. For example, sometimes a leader or a facilitator can neglect an idea from somebody. This person is very sensitive. You push them down. The next time, if they have an idea, they will think twice if they want to speak up. So there is a psychology factor that is uh, affecting generating an idea. So you will have to be very careful. Usually, brainstorming works better in the individual fashion because a human or person tend to be more free thinking on his own. But you have to write this idea or document it so you can later on share it with your team. The another tools or technique to identify risks is Delphi technique. Uh, it is basically a technique that derive a compromise among experts who make prediction about the future. So there are people who are knowledgeable, expert in the domain, sit together and start to think ahead about a problem that might face the uh, project. And sometimes it's good to provide an independent and anonymous input regarding future event, because also to avoid the psychological factor of having people speaking about what they think. And the technique use a round of question and written responses to this question, uh, and by writing you are trying to avoid bias effect possible when face to face or method such as brainstorming. So In this technique, you write down instead of in brainstorming. You are face to face and sitting with a colleague and trying to come up with idea verbally. Third technique is interviewing. Interviewing is a fact-finding technique and collecting information face to face, maybe by phone or by email, and or any other mean using social media, instant messaging, etc. And you basically interviewing people with similar experience of such a project uh, to identify potential risk. And this is, to me, is one of the best way of identifying risk, to ask the expert. To ask the expert. You probably know people who ran very similar project and they completed, and you will go to these people and ask them what is their feedback. Usually in real life, they project managers have us as a consultant. When I worked as a consultant, have to write every project we finish. I have to write lesson learned. Lesson learned. So I have to list what is the problem, what is the pain point, and so forth during the life of the project. And we have to document it and place it in one place. So this note, you can go back to it when you run another project to avoid the risks. It was very beneficial to upper management to study. They were looking, higher managers, they were always used to look for the lesson learns and pay attention to these lesson learns. So where they find common issues among the project and find ways to resolve this common issue. Of it is individual issue for this particular project, and it considered as something that we have learned from our experience. We can use it when we run a similar project in the future. I look for this issue as risks to this upcoming projects. And last one is SWOT analysis, which is strength, weakness, opportunities, and threats. You can use this SWOT analysis to identify risks, and this method help in identify different risk, regardless negative and positive, uh, and you apply this technique to identify any risk, regardless of negative or positive. And we mentioned something called risk register, and this is basically the main output document or record that is you need to produce as a project manager to list or identify the risks that you might encounter in your project. So the risk register is listing identified risk, and all other information that is needed or to list all the risk. So the risk register is a document contains the result of various risk management process. It includes the list of the risks and information around, related to the risks. Usually it's a spreadsheet format. We're using a spreadsheet to create the risk register. It's a tool to document potential risk. And risk event is referred to specific uncertain event that might occur to determine an enhancement for your project. What is risk register specifically contains? We mentioned the risk risk register is a spreadsheet, could be a spreadsheet format. It has an identification number of the risk and has a rank for the risk and the name and the description for the risk and the categories and what is the root cause of the risks. Simple, right? But it has to be documented, and this is a typical information of the content of the risk register. It also has triggers for each risk. What triggers that specific risk? It triggers indicators, symptom of the risk, potential response, what I need to do in case of I encounter that particular risk. And also it has to document who owns this risk. So the risk owner, person who will own and take the responsibility in case of that risk will occur during the project life cycle. And also probability and the impact of the risk need to be documented. How often this the risk will happen, and you need also to document in the risk register the status of the risk. Status is working on it, completed, avoided, and so forth. This is example of how you design a risk register, and simply as mentioned is a risk register could be a spreadsheet, number of the risk, you put a numbering criteria and the rank, risk, description, category, root cause, and so forth. All the information that is you need about the risk. So risk register is a document that you have to design to keep track, identify all the risks during the project life cycle. Quality risk analysis, you need to assess the impact of identify risk to determine the impact and the priority. For risk qualification tools, you need to calculate probability or create probability impact matrix and top 10 risk item tracker and expert judgment. So for risk quantification tools, we can do probability impact matrix, top 10 risk item tracker, and expert judgment. Probability impact matrix or chart lists the relative probability of the risk occurring on one side of the matrix, or X, and Y on the chart, and the other side you list the relative impact of the risk occurring, and you will have to label this risk as high, medium, or low in terms of the probability. Its probability of occurring is very high. Probability of occurring of this risk is low. And for our example, when you wanted to build a house, you did not do any previous analysis to the ground where you want to build the house. You still don't know where you're gonna build the house. The only thing you know is you need to build the house. At this point, the probability of the risk of needing ground base made of more iron is higher or less. It's definitely is high, because you still don't know what is the nature of the land where you want to build the house. But the probability will decrease if you already decide the land, the area where you want to build the house, because you can know the nature of the land. Probably you know there is a rock foundation, therefore you will not need that much iron base to be made. So this is a probability for that risk of needing more iron evaluation to be set aside for building the house base. Clear? And we can also calculate the risk factor. Risk factor numbers that represent the overall risk of specific event based on their probability. So you know the probability of occurring and the consequence, then you can calculate the risk factor. Let's see some example.
مهندس،
Probably اتفضل.
هلا احنا الطرق اللي اخذناها هسه عشان نحدد الريسكس بالاسايمنت تبعنا نستخدم اي واحدة فيهم عادي.
Yes.
اوكي تمام.
احنا we give you in general, انت be creative, use whatever one you want to. So probability impact matrix, as you see, the probability in one axle, and the impact is in another axle, and the matrix define the probability in terms of low, medium, high, and the impact again low, medium, high. And we have list of risks, and we have to use this matrix, identify where each risk sits. From seeing this matrix, what is the most high risk that you can see based on the probability matrix?
وات ايش مهندس ايش السؤال؟
The most high risk that impact in your project, that has the most probability to occur and the most will impact the project.
risk 1 and 4 صح؟
Risk 1 and 4 بالظبط. And what is the medium probability with high risk or high impact?
risk 3 and لا مع impact 2 5 and 11.
The medium and high, there's
انت
none.
حكيت medium. اوكي فكرت medium and medium.
Medium and medium, there's risk 2
risk 2
and
5
5 and
11.
3. So this is how we do the risk probability impact matters. So we still talking about performing qualitative risk analysis tools. And the first thing is a probability impact matrix. Probability impact matrix where we can have in one axle the probability defined in low, medium, high, and another axle in the impact defined in as low, medium, high, and we can classify our risk both in classify our risk based on this matrix. And this is a chart that show also high, medium, low risk technique by using chart. As you can see, based on probability of failure and the consequence of failure, how often that is could this risk be failing versus the probability. And there is low risk area and medium risk and high risks. Top 10 risk item is a qualitative risk analysis tool, also helps in identifying risk and maintain awareness of risk throughout project cycle. Is established a periodic review of top 10 project risk item. So you have top 10 risks, keep visiting those risks periodically and list the current ranking and the previous ranking on this point of time. Also, you need to list number of time the risk appears on the list, yani frequent of the risk over a period of time, and summary of the progress made in resolving that certain risk. So it is a method of tracking basically the risks over the period of project cycle. Example of a document, how you do top 10 risk item tracking. Let's say inadequate planning, risk, uh, how many times this risk happened is one time, this month, last month, two times, uh, number of the month in top 10 is 4, and the progress working on revising the entire project management plan. And this is an example of top 10 risk tracking document. Watch list is a list of risks that are low priority but are still identified as a potential risk. Not very high that we have to worry about it, but we have to keep in mind that particular risk could impact. It's not high risk, but low risk because the potential of happening is low. Qualitative analysis also can identify those risks that should be evaluated on a quantitative basis. Performing quantitative analysis, it is evolved from the qualitative analysis, but we can do both quantitative and qualitative analysis at the same time. For large and complex, you really don't want to get into quantitative risk analysis unless the project is very large. There is no need. You can do qualitative and will be good enough for smaller and medium projects, but for larger projects, you can involve different technology to do extensive quantitative risk analysis. And just want to mention these for the risk analysis technique for performing quantitative risk analysis. There's decision tree, simulation, and sensitive analysis.